5 Indian schools were named in the top 10 list for the world's best school prizes, and one Indian school became a top 3 finalist. These 5 schools are outliers, outstanding in their ability to put in place teaching practices and performance that impacts not just the lives of the students, but the communities. Making it to the shortlist itself meant demonstrating community collaboration, environmental action, innovation, overcoming adversity, and supporting healthy lives. That's not a small feat, given the fact that they come from a country that ranks among the top 5 economies in the world, but one that does poorly when it comes to educating its children. In a Swiss study conducted before the pandemic, India's education system ranked 43rd out of 64 major economies. It's clear that India needs a textbook to run better schools, and working towards that is T4 Education, the global platform that instituted the world's best school prizes. It is collaborating with these schools to develop transformational toolkits which provide step-by-step instructions on how other schools can replicate these models. Now more than ever before, we need better learning outcomes. The learning loss suffered by India's 320 million school-going children is severe after the pandemic kept them out of classrooms for more than 2 years. EdTech was started as a solution to bridge the learning gap, but in rural and semi-urban India, it was a cart without wheels. The World Bank says the share of children living in learning poverty was already at 53% before the pandemic. It could potentially reach 70% in a post-pandemic era. So how can India transform its education system and bring innovation and collaboration to learning? Hello and welcome to Young Turks, India's longest-running show on startups and entrepreneurship. I'm Shereen Bhan. Joining me on the show today, Vikas Pota, the founder and CEO of T4 Education, and 3 social innovation leaders that run 3 of the 5 Indian schools that have been shortlisted for the world's best school prizes. Kruti Bharucha of People, Saurabh Taneja of the Akanksha Foundation, and Rohit Kumar of the Apni Shala Foundation. Kruti, gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program, and congratulations to each one of you. But Saurabh, let me start by asking you, because Akanksha Foundation and your school did make it to the top 3 of the best schools list. And I have to say, I've been privileged to actually spend a day at one of the Akanksha Foundation schools. So particularly heartening to know that you've been able to achieve this feat. So Saurabh, let me start by asking you about this journey so far, but more importantly, in light of what the pandemic has done, the learning loss, but more importantly, the road ahead and the lessons to be learned. What has been the big change, the big shift?
Thanks a lot, Shereen, first and foremost, for spotlighting these stories of the stronger schools, as Vikas is very aptly amplifying and advocating for the same. Look, there are 2 or 3 big lessons that at least at Akanksha Foundation we are carrying forward post the pandemic. One is that the partnership with the parents and the community is of paramount importance. For Akanksha Foundation, this philosophy was always there, but more so in the last couple of years during the pandemic, it strengthened further. And we have seen its positive impact on our children, with 99% of them coming back to physical schools as soon as they reopen. So that's one. Second, I understand that there have been fairly too many limitations on tech integration in our schools. We still believe and are hopeful for a more positive and optimistic scenario with more of hybrid learning coming into place. And we are seeing its impact again in our spaces and in some of the spaces which are innovating in a very thoughtful way, without really diminishing the role of the educator or teacher, but really using technology to complement or supplement what the teachers do. And I think if we can combine these 2 aspects, we will be able to address the short-term learning losses that we have experienced during the pandemic, Shri.
Yes, collaboration with the community is going to be of utmost importance. But let me bring Vikas into the conversation. Vikas, thanks very much for joining us. I want to understand from you, what drove you to start T4 Education through the course of the pandemic? Your attempt is to try and bring together schools, to try and bring together educators from around the world to navigate the new normal. What's the experience been so far, Vikas, for you?
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and congratulations to all the schools who are present here today. Shereen, that's a really important question. And, I'm sure like many of you in India, I receive a lot of presentations on the future of education, which actually drive me mad. And because what I believe the future of education is, and what the pandemic demonstrated, is quite simply the need to have better schools and to invest in institution building. And so what the world's best prizes are is a mechanism for surfacing best practices from schools such as who are represented here today. Because I believe that we have lots to learn to make sure that schools around the world can improve. And when you talk about the learning loss in India, let me just tell you, there are almost 500 million children today around the world in failing schools, as reported by their own governments. And so we just need to do a better job in that. And the mechanism is one effort in trying to surface in best practices from schools around the world so that others can get inspired, can learn, can share, can collaborate, and all these wonderful things that can flow from that. And so that's what the motivation of the world's best school prizes is.
Well, thanks very much for sharing that with us, and you're absolutely right. The effort needs to be on how we can learn from these experiences. More importantly, how can we scale and replicate these models? But Kruti, let me come to you and understand what's happening as far as people's efforts are concerned. Now, you've been working in Delhi. You've also been working with the state government of Madhya Pradesh. To start with, Kruti, education and a bulk of driving education is still dependent on government schools and government infrastructure. How crucial is it going to have to be for the private sector, for the social sector, to continue to deepen its partnership, collaborate with the government to try and improve the quality of learning, to improve the quality of education in government schools? And how open are state governments at this point in time to this idea? You're working with two state governments, Delhi and Madhya Pradesh. What's the experience been like, Kruti?
Well, I think just on your first question, I think it's going to be critical to work with the government. There are about 150 million children that study in more than 1 million government schools, and often these children are from the poorest and most vulnerable communities. So if we really are serious about transforming the state of education in the country, we must do it through the government school system and system strengthening of government schools. I think there are a lot of opportunities now. Governments are extremely open to having non-state actors and non-profits come in to support particular interventions and to actually improve the system. I think what's critical in making a government partnership successful is really co-developing and co-designing those solutions with the government, rather than taking a particular solution that an organization believes in and then kind of going in and thrusting it on a large government school system. So there are constraints. There are cost constraints, there are budget constraints, there are staffing constraints within government schools. Many schools are, small schools, across the countryside in India. Some of them have only 50 students, 1 to 2 teachers. And so those are the realities of what we are dealing with when we are actually looking at working with a mix of rural and urban schools. It's very important to keep in mind the constraints, the real constraints that governments face. It's equally important to identify champions of change at the state government and national government level, and to work very closely to actually supplement their efforts and not substitute their efforts. So as an organization, that's something that we really believe in, that it's important to really be a thought partner, an implementation support partner, and also through our school in Delhi, to actually show what is possible. Oftentimes, if we are serious again about raising the bar of excellence, the school at Lajpat Nagar and our other schools in Delhi are really exemplars in terms of showing the bar that's possible in a government school system at the same cost as what the government spends, and not to kind of throw money at the problem and create a standalone exemplar school. On Delhi and Madhya Pradesh, I mean, the governments are extremely supportive, progressive. Again, with the government, it's not just working with the senior most bureaucrat or the education minister, but it's also working at all levels of the government bureaucracy and the government system. And I think we've really seen through the number of years that we have spent in building those trust relationships in these two states. It does take time. It requires determination, perseverance, but there is some real change that we have seen across these two geographies.
Determination, perseverance, and plenty of patience, I would imagine. And you're absolutely right in pointing out that there are constraints which are real constraints that one has to learn to navigate and live with. But Rohit, that's exactly the point that I want to address with you and your experience at Apni Shala, because you're also collaborating with about 20 plus government schools. To Kruti's points, these are real challenges, whether it's budgetary constraints or staffing constraints. How do you ensure that you do, in her words, supplement government's efforts as opposed to substituting them? And what is the ideal model going forward on how we can actually take these successful models and replicate them across different parts of the country? Rohit.
Thank you, Shereen, and thank you, Vikas, for this experience of going through the prize, because that definitely gave us a lot of reflections. One, I think, absolutely agree with Kruti in understanding that governments are open, they are engaging and opening up more and more dialogue here. What we are also understanding is that what is the type of school we are trying to kind of replicate. And when we are thinking about education, what is the core piece that education is missing at this point? So when we went into schools in 2013, when we started Apni Shala's work, what we noticed was that there is some academic work that is already happening. There is some physical development work that is already happening. But what was missing in schools was that social and emotional development piece. And that's exactly what Apni Shala said, that we don't want to start doing what the government schools are already doing, but how can we bring in what is not there? And there is enough and more research that says that without social and emotional development, without well-being, learning of any sorts cannot happen. You can have the best teacher in a math classroom, but if the child has experienced abuse in the house or is hungry right now, they cannot learn. And that's when bringing in education and mental health together was very, very critical. And that's the experiment we are hoping to do with Coach, that can Coach become that model school within the government school system that showcases how this work can happen. And then when there's a model that is already existing and slowly building that relationship on ground with teachers, with principals, with parents, then it has a better buy-in.
Speaking of what I've heard from each one of you, and I now want you to break this down for us, because, whether it's Kruti or Saurabh or you, Rohit, all of you have talked about how you've been able to create these model schools of excellence within the current bureaucratic environment, within the current budgetary and resource constraints. I want to understand what that secret sauce is. What are those ingredients? Break this down for us so that we can understand what we need to work on, what we need to prioritize, what we need to focus on. Kruti, let me start by asking you, you've done it within the existing system with all of its constraints and all of its challenges. What is the secret sauce?
So for us, we anchor all of our efforts around improving teacher-student engagement. That is really the heart of what we do. The government has been able to do well in terms of enrollment of children, especially in the remotest areas. Through the midday meal system, they've been able to really do well on or make huge strides on attendance, children coming into school. I think where we have focused our efforts as an organization and where we work closely with the government is really around how do you improve teacher-student engagement? And this is through better classroom practice. What happens in the classroom every minute of the school day? I think it is setting in place those routines, those behaviors, those practices, helping teachers get skilled, making sure the monitoring and classroom observation protocols and rubrics are in place, ensuring that school leaders get the right training and support to be able to look at learning outcomes and looking at data. And then finally, looking at incentives and accountability within the system that focus much more on academic improvement rather than administrative improvement. And so in Delhi, we started with one school in 2017. That's where we demonstrated what was possible. We had the data and the evidence to actually show the difference that came about through the differences in classroom practice and improved student engagement. And then when we work with government, we're now working across 2 states with 100,000 schools, 300,000 teachers. When we work across the state, we work really on the how do you make that happen? How do you make student engagement better. And that is really through teacher skilling, improved mentoring and coaching, and improved incentives and accountability at the state level.
Yeah, so let me get Saurabh to comment on that. How do you make it happen, Saurabh? What have been the ingredients that you've had to prioritize and focus on to ensure that you actually make Akanksha one of the top 3 schools in the best schools list? And what is it that we can take away from this if one were to put a playbook together?
So Shereen, I would say that one of the important aspects that we as a nation must embrace is what Vikas highlighted, which is really seeing the role of schools at the forefront of change. I just think that there's not adequate attention given in really thinking about amplifying what's really working in strong schools. And I think the opportunities to be able to use the forum like T4 or so many others that even happen in our own country to really study what goes into make an excellent school, whether it's run by a non-state actor or as well as this, government itself, will be supremely, useful for policymakers first and foremost. Second, I think like all of us on this panel will concur the phenomenally important role of educators in any school system, which is teachers as well as the school principals. And I just think that in India, we really, really need to find a way to embrace far more autonomy and empowerment, with which we believe will come the accountability. And I think that's one of the most important levers that we at Akanksha have prioritized over the years in building a strong ecosystem, as well as, really not treating the partnership with the parents as well as the community as something that happens outside. Right? And how do you really see the role of the school in building the community, or see it as a microcosm of the world or the community that we are creating, and really build far more community collaboration beyond just engaging the parents on school management committees for that matter. And I think that's the second lever. And the third, I would say, is that, it's an opportune time post-COVID where, the world, the education summit recently held, by UNICEF, is talking about really reimagining the role of education and what does education look like in the coming decades in and of itself. And I think that's a great conversation to sort of start in our country. And that's another secret sauce, where we are constantly engaging in dialogue with our children, our parents, our educators on what's most meaningful for you and for the children and for the community. And I think if this kind of a continuous dialogue could continue at multiple levels, I think that we will have the necessary ingredients that will allow for some of these practices to scale or amplify.
You're talking about having a conversation and starting a dialogue on how we can reimagine education, reimagine the classroom, and that's what we're attempting to do here on this program on Young Turks. So Rohit, let me get you to build on what we just heard there from Kruti and Saurabh. When we talk about reimagining the classroom with the use of technology, bringing much more of technology into the classroom, changing the method and the manner of educating children, the manner in which educators themselves are being skilled and trained. Outline for me the things that you believe policymakers, governments, educators, school principals, the social sector needs to focus on. What could this new model, this new way signal herald?
I think, Shereen, one thing that we keep reminding ourselves at Apni Shala is that when we speak about system is not an abstract concept, right? System is people. And when we are thinking about people, we have to think about relationships. So say, for example, at Apni Shala as well, when we kind of think about building a new partnership with a government school, then we start from the very core and very ground. That what is our relationship with parents of that school? What is the relationship with students or teachers or principals of that school? And then we go to the municipal office to get the final letter of approval that, hey, we want to work in these 20 schools or 22 schools, right? Currently, MCGM is asking us to do like the entire L ward or M ward, but we are choosing not to, because we really believe that when we are building relationships, when people really understand what needs to change, it will take time. And that brings to my second point, which is when we are speaking about scale, scale will look different for different types of initiatives. For example, if I have to scale up an literacy initiative, we really understand literacy now really, really well, right? So that's a very different conversation. Whereas scaling up social emotional development, that's a very new conversation. We are still understanding what is social emotional development, what is the role of mental health in education. To scale up that will be very slow, very different, we will have to be very patient with that. So how are we talking about scale? Are we using one metric for everything? Can we think about different metrics for different aspects of education? That I think will be super critical, whether at policy level, whether at school level, whether at an organization level, for us to reconsider and continue to renegotiate. Thank you.
Yeah, Vikas, let me come to you. You started the program by saying that you were being sent presentations that drove you mad or drove you up the wall in terms of what the ideal school should look like. At the end of this exercise of being able to review and assess what really goes into making a model school, what really goes into driving excellence and good outcomes within a classroom, what is your message today to governments, to policymakers and to educators?
So there's so many points that I want to actually draw upon, Shereen, in this part of your program. The first thing is, when you look at this program and you look at the ticker at the bottom which says reinventing classrooms with technology, whilst I agree that technology is important, I don't think it's the biggest priority we have to place an emphasis on. Actually, what we know is that we need to make sure that we get the best and brightest teachers into classrooms all over the world. And for that, we have a heck of a lot of work to do. And we know that the holy grail in making sure that we improve learning outcomes lies in making sure that we train our teachers effectively. Now, what we are doing, for example, at T4, post the first round of the World's Best School Prizes, is we're bringing all of these teachers into a professional learning community, and people can download our app on iOS or Android. It's called T4 Communities. And the idea there is that let us learn together, because there's so many similarities of the challenges and the opportunities that schools have around the world that we can learn from, which our prizes actually showcase in a significant way. The second thing I want to tell you is you ask about the secret sauce, and the three leaders that you have over here are far too modest to actually talk about it like this. But I suspect that whilst they're finalists in a particular category, they could actually become finalists in all the other categories that also are there, simply because they're fantastic leaders. And so I'm on the board of an NGO called Global School Leaders, which many of you will know about. And again, the emphasis on leadership in education is something that we need to bring post-pandemic for sure, but we have to recognize and acknowledge the role that good leadership plays in moving things forward and in advancing. And in education, we don't have much actual leadership training and development that is offered to teachers and school leaders. And so I would suspect that the answer, actually the secret sauce, is in making sure that we have more Krutis, Rohits, Saurabhs, and such in the world of education that actually move things along. And then the third thing I want to mention is, these prizes, the prize is a mechanism. And it's not, yes, of course, we're celebrating these schools. You are putting on a program to showcase these schools, which I'm very grateful for. But actually, it's a mechanism to make sure that we inspire conversation and to make sure that those that are watching, at the dining room table this evening, they say, hey, I heard about this school that focuses on social emotional learning for our children. Can we take that practice to our school? So all of your viewers that are watching should be inspired by the three examples here today. Go and learn about them and go to your children's schools and say, we want this in our school. And this is regardless of whether you're a private school, you're a religious school, you're a not-for-profit school. These solutions are scalable and they need your leadership and advocacy, which I'm really grateful to you for. Lastly, we launch our next round of applications for the World's Best School Prizes in a couple of weeks, and we encourage you to have a look at our website and engage with our rubrics and frameworks. We would love to see more Indian schools actually come forward, because the story isn't as bleak as what people put out. Yes, there are these challenges, but these three schools, as an example, have showcased that excellence resides everywhere. but the opportunity to tell their story, only, we need to make sure that they have that opportunity. And that's the most important thing through the prizes that we're trying to do.
Well, yes, and we're certainly proud of the fact that we're being able to tell their story here, and we do hope that it inspires many educators around the country to do and try new things within the classroom to ensure that they do achieve the kind of outcomes that these three have been able to achieve. So let me end by asking each one of you, and Kruti, I'll start with you. What's next now on the agenda in terms of taking this forward, in terms of further collaborations? Are you talking to other state governments at this point in time? What should we expect?
Well, from our perspective, we have codified a lot of what we do at our schools, and that is what we then take to scale and embed into all of our work at the systemic level with state governments. And so there is a strong focus on really codifying. There is a strong focus on continuing to innovate, because there is much to iterate, learn, and continuously improve when it comes to actually running a school and running school systems. And then the way forward, rather than having a presence of, a handful of schools across, 25, 28, 30 Indian states, what we really want to do is at a policy level, really engage with the Ministry of Education centrally and think about how do we actually bring some of these best practices into policy? How do we, as practitioners, kind of spread these best practices collectively, collaborate much more, and really have that reach state governments? And a great way to do that is kind of through the national ministry.
Well, I hope that you open source this playbook so that many more can actually learn and hopefully replicate the success that you've been able to achieve. But Saurabh, I wanted you to pick up on what we just heard there from Kruti in terms of the changes that you believe we need to make in terms of policy. What would those be? And also, as far as Akanksha is concerned, what's the plan from here on?
So Shereen, I think both Vikas and Kruti have already spoken about what we would love to see in terms of policy shifts. I think my ask is threefold. Far more nuanced development focus for teachers as well as school leaders in our country. Second, let's just find a way to be able to inspire the next generation of youth to come and join education and really solve this complex, hairy problem. My journey started when I joined the Teach for India Fellowship almost 13, 14 years ago. And, I'm grateful for Akanksha Foundation and the experience that I had at TFI to sort of continue to do what I do today. And then, so that's the second one, like, how do we make this aspirational and not just like really spotlight the bleak aspects of it? So that's the second. And the third is, I know there's a lot of emphasis right now being put on foundational literacy and numeracy. I would just say that, as policymakers, we should not really forget about the whole child development. And post the pandemic, there is a greater risk for just talking about academic learning loss and like forgetting all the things that Rohit is talking about that are equally critical in the child's development, which is social, emotional, and ethical learning as well, which is what Akanksha is doing currently in partnership with the Emory University and SEAL India. So pretty much like, the roadmap for the organizations in India, Ashini, is pretty straightforward, right? Like you prove, you multiply, and amplify. And that's a strategic framework that Akanksha also has. And what we are most keen to do currently in the near term is to really, focus on depth and do what we can to sort of turn around all of our 26 schools. The second thing, what we are doing is we are partnering currently with Pune and Nagpur municipal corporations to really build a city as a unit of change model where all the schools in these cities are able to demonstrate learning outcomes, holistic learning outcomes for primary children. And the third is, can we really, innovate and research on building greater evidence? Like, for instance, currently Akanksha is partnering with Emory University to study the impact of the social, emotional, and ethical learning curriculum. And can we make that as public, good? In the same way, we are partnered with Brookings to really study about the impact that Akanksha is having on the community engagement, and and sort of make that as a part of the global playbook. So that's the way we look at the work that we do, Shereen.
Well, Rohit, so let me give you the final word then. As we just heard there from Saurabh, if we were to take the prove, multiply, amplify model forward, what would that mean as far as Apni Shala is concerned?
I think, Shereen, for us, we are actually at a place where we are building our next rigid plan. So what we are doing is we are taking a step back to go deeper. Because what we realize is that our understanding of social emotional development has to become further nuanced. And when that happens, what else needs to happen? As Saurabh was speaking about, what has happened during COVID, but in fact, WHO has declared that India is going through a mental health pandemic even before COVID. So how can we advocate for integrating mental health with education? And how can we amplify that voice, and much of this work will happen in partnership with the government and non-government stakeholders, whether non-profits, private schools, corporations, or companies who are kind of interested in thinking about this together. For example, Apni Shala runs an advocacy event every year, which is called Celebrating Inclusion Summit in partnership with Ummeed Child Development Center, where we are trying to kind of build voices around this, that why social emotional learning, why inclusion, why mental health is critical for a school to kind of think about. Two, I think, is for us to think about, we know how to assess math, we know how to assess literacy, we know how to assess science, right? We kind of have figured that out by now, globally. But we don't know how to really understand how is a young person growing in their social emotional development. So for that reason, we are working with Atma. It's an organization based out of Bombay, where we are kind of building a evaluation framework for social emotional development, which is grounded in the context of India. Because a lot of frameworks are available internationally, but a lot of them don't respond to what is happening in India culturally, socially, and emotionally. And third is also building partnerships in our effort to make much of this framework available to anyone and everyone who wants to use it in the ecosystem.
Well, I think that point that you made about relevance of solutions for our context, for the Indian context, that's a very important point as well. And I think that is going to be very important as we, go through this process of reimagining what the solutions can be for our schools and for our classrooms. Kruti, Saurabh, Rohit and Vikas, thanks very much for joining us here on this special edition of Young Turks. We wish all of you the very best of luck, and thanks very much for your time as well as for your insights. Before we wrap, I'd like to end this special on social entrepreneurship by paying homage to one of India's most exemplary and iconic social activists. Ila Bhatt, the founder of Seva, a pioneer of women's rights, died at the age of 89 in Ahmedabad, a Gandhian. She was the chairperson of the Sabarmati Ashram Trust, served as the chancellor of the Gujarat Vidyapeeth from 2015 until last month. Born in Ahmedabad on the 7th of September in 1933, Ila Behan Bhatt, as she was popularly known, founded the Self-Employed Women's Association of India, or Seva, in 1972 and served as its general secretary from 1972 to 1996. She set up a Seva Co-op Bank in 1974 to give small loans to women. In 1979, Bhatt co-founded the Women's World Banking, a global microfinance network to support poor working women. She was the chair from 1984 to 88. A lawyer by training, Bhatt was a part of the International Labour, Cooperative Women and Microfinance movements and won several national and international awards, including the Magsaysay Award, the Right Livelihood Award for helping home-based producers to organize their welfare and self-respect, the Padma Bhushan and the Padma Shri. Always leading from the front, the champion who fought for self-employed women's labour rights through her life once said, and I quote, "It is the women who are the leaders in change, and without their participation, poverty can never be removed."